Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the 10th movie in a franchise that began about 60 years ago, and it's a series that has definitely had its ups and downs. It's been everything from deadly serious to wacky in a sitcom sort of way. Sometimes it's grounded, and other times it's downright bizarre. But I find something to appreciate in every movie, and it was honestly a joy rewatching them all for the timeline I put together recently. Since then, I've been feeling an urge to share my thoughts on them. Over time, I'm hoping to review all the Planet of the Apes movies, but just for today, I wanted to go back to the original, 1968's Planet of the Apes. This movie was based on a French novel by Pierre Boulle, and it wasn't the first adapted from his work. That would be The Bridge on the River Kwai, the highest-grossing film of 1957 and winner of 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Hopefully you're familiar with it, but even if not, you probably know one of its stars, Alec Guinness, who would go on to play Obi-Wan Kenobi. Pierre Boulle wrote the novel based on his own experience in World War II, where he spent 2 years incarcerated in a Japanese prison camp. The experience which inspired his 11th novel, Planet of the Apes, was far less intense. According to him, it was a simple visit to the zoo. I watched the gorillas. I was impressed by their human-like expressions. It led me to dwell upon and imagine relationships between human and apes. The big screen adaptation came when producer Arthur P. Jacobs told literary agents, "I wish King Kong hadn't been made so I could make it." And in response, one of them sent him a copy of Monkey Planet, as it was titled in the UK thanks to some complexity in the translation. They brought on Rod Serling, who created The Twilight Zone, to write the script. And then they brought on another writer, Michael Wilson, to work with him. Michael was the one responsible for one of the biggest changes from the novel. In Boulle's story, the ape society was nearly as advanced as modern humans, with electricity, cars, planes, and even satellites. Depicting this would be quite expensive, so instead Wilson made it a more primitive civilization, but civilization nonetheless. There were other significant changes, but for the most part, the movie does a good job condensing the story while retaining its spirit. I'll talk about more changes from the book to the movie after this recap. This will be a little more condensed, but if you want more detail, check out my timeline video. Now, let's get into it. In 1972, George Taylor and 3 other astronauts began a voyage in search of life on other planets. By the time they land, over 2,000 years have passed, thanks to the time-dilating effect of near-light-speed travel. Not only have they lost 2 millennia, but also Marianne Stewart, thanks to a malfunctioning hibernation pod. The 3 survivors begin their search. For Taylor, who has become disillusioned with humanity, it is not only a search for life, but for something better than man, beings who do not go to war or starve their neighbor. But in the course of their first day on this new planet, what they find is man, humans like them, but primitive and mute. Worse than that, they find the things which hunt these primitive people, apes. Intelligent, horse-riding, gun-wielding apes. In the latest raid, one of Taylor's fellow travelers is killed, while he and Landon are captured separately. As a prisoner of the apes, Taylor quickly learns everything he can. Dr. Zira, a chimpanzee, is his best hope of an ally. She is a curious scientist who would help if she knew he possessed the faculties of higher thinking, which the humans of this planet apparently lack. The orangutan Dr. Zaius, the one in charge of science and faith on the other hand, is likely an enemy. According to him, humans are nothing more than a nuisance, and the sooner they're exterminated, the better. Taylor tries to prove his intelligence, but a wound from the raid prevents him speaking. For now, he is left in a cell like the others, and even given a female companion in hopes they will mate. Soon, Taylor succeeds in showing Zira his true nature. He snatches her notebook and does something no ape has ever witnessed man do before. He writes 4 simple words, "My name is Taylor." She brings him home to share this discovery with her fiancé Cornelius. This might substantiate his crazy theory that apes evolved from a lower order of primate, possibly man. Cornelius previously discovered traces of human culture older than recorded time in the Forbidden Zone. But he has learned to keep his mouth shut on these matters. Apes believe they were created in God's image, as told in the sacred scrolls by their prophet, the lawgiver. Questioning those scrolls could get him killed as a heretic. Once Taylor is back in his cage, a couple of gorillas arrive on Dr. Zaius' orders to collect him for gelding, a procedure typically done on horses to remove their reproductive organs. Taylor decides he'd rather not, and instead fights off the apes. But with the entire town after him, he's quickly recaptured. The police grab hold of him until Taylor, with his throat finally healed, shouts,
"Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!"
Over the next few weeks, he lives in a cage, but at least has Nova to keep him company. That's what he's begun calling her. And though she may not understand him, she has been a good listener. Soon, he is brought to a hearing in front of Zaius and some other orangutans. They accuse Zira and Cornelius of heresy, surgically altering this man to speak, a hoax to promote their blasphemous theory of evolution. No matter what Taylor says or does, they refuse to entertain the idea of intelligent creatures aside from apes. They even check Taylor's claim that he is not the only human capable of speech. They find his shipmate Landon, and he is just as primitive as the other humans. Taylor can't understand it, until he spots the surgical scar on his head. These apes cut out a chunk of his brain. The outcome of the hearing, Zira and Cornelius are out on bail, awaiting a trial for heresy, and Taylor will soon join Landon as a lobotomized shell of his old self. But that night, Zira sends her nephew to break him out, and together they make their escape into the Forbidden Zone, until Dr. Zaius catches up with them. But this time, Taylor has a gun, courtesy of Cornelius. He forces the orangutan to join them on an excursion to the cave where Cornelius found evidence of that ancient human civilization. Next to some human bones, they find a human doll which speaks.
Dr. Zaius, would an ape make a human doll that talks?
The police move in until Taylor uses Zaius as a hostage to negotiate for supplies. Once he has them, he takes off with Nova. Zaius seals the cave to cover up the evidence and protect the history told in the sacred scrolls. Further down the beach, meanwhile, Taylor finally sees it. The Statue of Liberty, and now he knows that he is not on some other planet, but is in fact on Earth. Humanity did what he always knew they would, destroyed themselves, and now they've turned Earth into a planet of apes.
You maniacs! You blew it up! Damn you! God damn you all to hell!
That ending is one of the most iconic of all time. Sadly today, it's impossible to watch without the foreknowledge of the twist, because it's so embedded in pop culture. In fact, I probably learned about it first from The Simpsons.
Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
One of the greatest bits of all time from Simpsons, by the way. Anyway, even without the element of surprise, I still find the ending powerful. The Statue of Liberty was a great choice for the thing to be buried in sand, because despite the argument of how closely we have or have not lived up to the ideals represented by it, the statue does represent certain ideals. Ideals that, if we do live up to them, might play a role in preventing the sort of future foretold by this movie, where we've destroyed ourselves in nuclear war, paving the way for a new species to take dominion over the planet. It's an image I saw countless times through pop culture osmosis before ever sitting down to watch the movie itself. but seeing it in context and discovering it through Charlton Heston's eyes makes it fresh all over again, and he manages to deliver his closing lines with gravitas that prevents them feeling ridiculous, as they easily could have. He calls us maniacs, and calls on God to damn us to hell. I would typically hate a movie for bashing me over the head with its message, but here the stakes are high enough, and George Taylor has been pushed far enough that when he punches his fist into the sand, decrying humanity's failures, I buy it, and it sticks with me. This, by the way, is one of those changes from the novel. It has a similar message, but uses a different ending, including some twists of its own. I won't spoil it here because for me, having seen all of the Apes movies, but never having read the novel, it was a great way to relive the story in a fresh way. Like I said, it's very similar to the movie, but different enough you don't know quite what's going to happen next. It also expands on one of the themes I really appreciated in the movie: intelligence and rationality. We've been gifted these tools, and it is our choice to use them or not. To even a casual observer, George Taylor is intelligent. He is not like Coco the gorilla or other apes in the real world who have been taught some form of sign language. There's debate to be had. Are they using language or simply performing tricks and imitating, or as the novel points out, aping, another word for imitating? In Taylor's case, it's clear he is having novel thoughts, combining words in complex ways according to rules of grammar, and so on. But Dr. Zaius will not be convinced. And even when he is convinced, he chooses to hide the knowledge, preserving lies instead. I remember the first time I watched the hearing where Dr. Zaius and the other orangutans investigate Taylor. As a kid, it was fascinating because even at a young age, I knew the futility of arguments. I'd never seen anyone change their mind on anything important in the real world. So how would Dr. Zaius respond to Taylor? The answer might have been my first introduction to the insidious way narratives can be corrupted, because apparently, when you have a collection of facts, they don't add up to an overarching truth on their own. It's up to a thinking mind to craft the narrative which connects them, and that leaves a lot of room for creativity, especially when bias is involved. Zaius does not want to believe humans can think. So, Taylor must be a hoax. There must be some other explanation. The hearing scene is so effective because Zaius doesn't come off as stupid. He is clearly intelligent, so he's able to produce arguments against the things we know are true. Of course, the human doll penetrates all this, and then we see another side. It isn't just bias that obscures the truth, but sometimes willful deceit. These are things humanity is guilty of too, but thanks to the book's conceit, a society of intelligent apes, we're able to observe these traits as outsiders. We can think about them in fictional apes before reflecting to see that they're in us too. Like I mentioned, the book expands on the theme of intelligence in a sort of absurd but memorable way. In the movie adaptation, we can assume humanity's higher thinking faded over centuries. But in the book, we see it happen in a matter of weeks. The protagonist, Ulysse Maru, finds his fellow survivor has become primitive, just like George Taylor found with Landon. In the movie, this was thanks to a lobotomy, but in the book, he simply lost his intelligence in captivity. It's implied it happened thanks to a sort of giving up. He saw no hope of persevering on the planet of apes, and instead resolved himself to a lower form of survival, living among and becoming like the other primitives. Maru, meanwhile, found the resolve to hold on. This idea stretches credulity, but it does emphasize intelligence as a great thing to be preserved. As Ulysse observes ape culture, he also observes that they mostly live through imitation. The orangutans who consider themselves the teachers and philosophers mostly regurgitate ideas from other great thinkers, and these new writings are copied by yet more orangutans. It's only a few times in a century that true innovation takes place. And then he realizes the same is true for humans back on Earth. All of this, from the book to the movie, adds up to a message that it's easy to live and get by without exercising the higher thinking we've been gifted with. As the villain, Dr. Zaius comes to represent bias and willful ignorance. The humans come to represent that idea in the book, how higher thinking can be ignored and let go of in favor of just surviving and going along. It's a cautionary tale to instead exercise the amazing thing we have in our brains, a mind. The book and movie also caution against a specific form of non-thinking, discrimination based on outward characteristics. The characters in this movie judge each other based on the shell which contains their mind. Is it human or ape? The book and subsequent movies delve further into this idea when the differences among apes also play a more significant role. Chimps, orangutans, and gorillas, despite similar capability and higher thinking, slot themselves into specific roles in society. Watching this relatively young civilization compared to humans find its footing, while at the same time learning of humanity's end, nuclear war, the movie emphasizes the gravity of these conflicts. On one side, we have the benevolent apes Cornelius and Zira. On the other, we have Dr. Zaius, who judges one man on the basis of an entire species. He shares the same hate and willful ignorance that also exists among humans, and it's one of the traits which likely plants the seeds that ultimately buried the Statue of Liberty on the beach. These are the ideas Planet of the Apes always conjures for me, and as I often say when discussing a movie's themes, they aren't necessarily new ones. But when someone finds a unique way to experience old ideas, it has the power to reinforce them in an individual, or if they penetrate the culture, the ideas might be more widely accepted in society. We are visual creatures, and it's always helpful to have metaphors in mind that become shortcuts for something more complicated. For the pitfalls of self-destruction, I have that picture of a half-buried Statue of Liberty. For the mental laziness that leads to passivity, I have the image of a humankind that's fallen into a primitive state. For the bias, willful ignorance, and self-importance that leads to oppression, I have Dr. Zaius. Of course, ideas are great and all, but if you want people to hear them, first you need them to enjoy your story to begin with. Because of course, if they don't watch, they won't hear your ideas to begin with. You don't need me to tell you Planet of the Apes does a great job. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing a new entry in the franchise almost 60 years after the original. But I'll at least talk a little about why I enjoy the movie so much, other than its underlying ideas. First, the movie does a great job setting the tone in the first few minutes. It starts with George Taylor on the vessel, wondering what humanity must look like now that centuries have gone by. He's clearly become cynical, hoping that people are no longer killing or starving each other. This tells us everything about his character, prepares us to think about the movie's themes, and sets up the sense of discovery I love in great sci-fi. We're in the distant future, so naturally we're curious of what we'll find. Once they're on the planet, they quickly end up in a desert, which emphasizes their loneliness and distance from civilization. Not only do they think they are far from Earth, but everyone they've ever known or loved has been dead for a couple thousand years. George Taylor is cruel about this fact, rubbing it in Landon's face, who doesn't quite believe it.
Still can't accept it. Time's wiped out everything you ever knew. It's all dust.
Prove it.
The time dilation effect is just a theory, but we're led to believe from the start we have no reason to doubt it. It's disturbing to think about what that must feel like, and you can imagine, in a panic, trying to convince yourself it's not true. It's also worth pointing out how unique this is for a protagonist. You'd expect him to be a benevolent hero, someone we can easily root for, but instead, he comes off as a pretty big jerk here. It's moments like this where I definitely feel Rod Serling's influence. Some of the best moments of Twilight Zone are just conversation, touching on interesting or disturbing ideas, delivered by actors who make you feel their significance. I mentioned the sense of discovery already, and it's definitely something I enjoy throughout the movie. Even though you already know where the movie is going based on its title, you still wonder, what does a planet of apes look like? How does their culture compare to ours? It's fun discovering all of that through Taylor's eyes. And there's the tension. You feel Taylor's frustration being looked at as primitive when he knows that he has just as much of a mind as the apes. Going back to the movie's themes, of course many can relate to that feeling, being judged on only what's visible externally with no appreciation for who you are inside. I have to admit though, it's a bit convenient that Taylor can't speak thanks to that bullet wound. When he tries to write in the dirt, the primitives wipe it away. It's almost comical the difficult time he has trying to prove he is intelligent, and you can feel the script struggling to delay that moment as long as possible. But I definitely did feel his frustration and wanted to see him succeed, while at the same time worrying what Zaius or the other apes might do to him out of fear once they know his capabilities. While the book has its own share of absurdities, this is one area where it's a bit more grounded than the movie. The protagonist can speak, but not any language the apes have ever heard. So to them, it's interesting that this human makes sound other than wordless grunts, but gibberish isn't that much more impressive. The way he finally breaks through to Zira unequivocally is using mathematics, drawing diagrams to represent mathematical concepts that prove understanding, not just mimicry. I found that a little more satisfying than the "my name is Taylor" moment in the movie. It also leads to Taylor becoming friends with Cornelius and Zira. After watching apes slaughter people and hold him captive, it's so relieving when he finds apes with something to show other than hate. Other than Charlton Heston, Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter do such a great job, fueling their characters with memorable personalities, even through the heavy makeup. And they're complicated. They become allies to Taylor, but you can sense their trepidation when he becomes violent toward Zaius toward the end. I already talked about the sequence of Cornelius, Zira, and Taylor at that hearing. These movies all contain a degree of action-adventure, but these Serling-esque moments, conversations that tackle big ideas with high stakes, are what keep my attention the most. And they aren't just high stakes in a theoretical sense, but they feel personal too, because convincing Dr. Zaius isn't just about being right. It's also about securing Taylor's freedom and possibly his life. It's funny, I've gotten to this point without discussing an aspect of the movie, which is one of the things that made it most notable at the time: the makeup. Honestly, it's hard to fully appreciate it in hindsight after decades of innovation in both digital and practical effects. But even that says something. If the makeup had not been done so well, this movie would feel dated to a point where it'd be difficult to watch. And of course, the apes in this movie don't really look like apes. They look like some cross between simian and human. But for me personally, at least, it works in the context. If we accept the conceit that a couple of thousand years has evolved them, then I can accept that it didn't just affect their minds, but also their appearance, turning them more humanoid. They also do a great job of twitching their facial muscles frequently enough so the masks wouldn't appear too still, helping to create the illusion that these are actual faces. Getting the makeup right was one of the biggest challenges in the movie. Many of the people involved were afraid it would come off as ridiculous, so they did a screen test before committing to an entire movie. And not that they're looking for my approval 60 years later, but I think they pulled it off. Finally, what more can I say about the ending of the movie? It's iconic and one of the most memorable in history. I love the part of a movie where you know there's a big reveal coming. They're walking down the beach. What will they find? Often, the revelation is a disappointment. On one end, you can go too far, and it feels like the ending came out of nowhere. On the other end, it doesn't go far enough, so the reveal feels underwhelming and disappointing. But this movie hits the sweet spot. It makes sense in context, it's emotionally devastating, and it's meaningful. Planet of the Apes is a great movie, and not only that, it was also a box office success, nominated for Best Original Score and Costume Design at the Oscars, and winner of an honorary Oscar for John Chambers and his makeup design. An honorary Oscar, by the way, is something handed out at the separate Governor's Awards for an achievement that doesn't fit an existing category, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling didn't exist until 1981, after they got backlash for failing to recognize the achievement of the Elephant Man. I should note, by the way, John Chambers was handed his award by an actual chimp. With all that success, a sequel was inevitable. But how do you follow a classic? Well, they had to dig deep. They had to dig beneath the Planet of the Apes. And that's when things get really weird. But that's a story for another time. For now, thank you for watching. If you want to see me talk about it, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.
Oh, Dr. Zayas.